Hello, I'm Terry Gesualdo. Welcome to La Dolce Audio and another Fireside Chat. This Fireside Chat's going to be about correlations, things I found that relate to something very specific and in another area. And I know that seems ambiguous at this point, so just be patient and you'll understand what I'm talking about. One of the first correlations I ever found in audio was with vinyl, because at one point 100% of my record collection was vinyl, right? Or cassettes. I would take vinyl. Remember Nakamichi Dragon, Nakamichi, what was it, the 1000? Anyway, cassettes were big back in the day, and getting good quality cassettes was a big thing. So Nakamichi was the first company in the 1970s to really make high-end cassette playback systems. So that was a thing. Anyway, vinyl correlation. What I found back, I don't know, in the 90s, prior to the 90s, I don't know, it took us, because the CD player was invented, 1981? Something like that, it was released. Sony and Philips released the CD player. And that was it still is a wonderful invention. And now they were almost going away, and you could buy like 50 CDs for $10 on eBay, at one point. And you'd have to get some CDs you didn't like, but I'm like, well, it's worth a jewel case, because sometimes I break my jewel cases a lot. I'm not sure. It took me a while to figure out when I got I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed always, but it took me a lot to figure out how to cut that little line of that little piece of clear tape that was on a jewel case, so that when I opened it up, I just didn't break the plastic. Yeah, I'm a bull in a china shop. Anyway, vinyl. What does it correlate to? Well, what I noticed in vinyl is there's a lot more information on vinyl, a lot more resolving detail, you could say. And it wasn't necessarily more detail that you think when it comes to harmonics of instruments or things like that, or just things. It's spatial detail. It's sort of like spatial information. And I think there's another correlation here I have to talk about after this, but that relates to that. Anyway, this detail and this resolution of vinyl, gives you better imaging and soundstage capability. That's what I found. And so, back in right around 2000 to 2005, I hope I don't get sued by a label company or whatever, because I'm not going to say a song, but I would rip some LPs with a program called Goldwave. And you can find old versions of Goldwave still that you can download from the internet. Goldwave was an interesting product in the sense because it was the best ripper I could find. It was amazing the amount of information you could capture from an LP with that particular program. There was a lot of other programs, a lot of very popular programs, but Goldwave, which was completely free and kind of seemed like it was unknown except to some, some areas of audiophiles here and there that were talking about it, but it really captured sound really well from an LP. And then there was various. Now the interesting thing is I didn't use Goldwave to, what do you call that? To burn CDs out of what I ripped from LPs. I used another program for that. And this other program I used for that had this dynamic feature. So I just experimented with the dynamic feature. And I found that you could use this dynamic feature. Now, none of these effects that you used on these digital software programs could you use very aggressively. You could always only use them somewhat mildly. Otherwise, you'd start getting these aliasing effects of digital noise. And so you don't want that. Anyway, this one dynamic feature of this one program, software, it made the files sound more and more like vinyl. And so when you ripped from vinyl and then put it on there and then enhanced it just a little bit with some of these software programs, it was amazing what you could get. Now, this is the interesting thing. That taught me an interesting correlation. And that is that digital, it wasn't digital, that was the problem. It was whoever was mixing or doing or burning or doing whatever to the format, that was the problem. Because I could get recordings and make them sound pretty much just like the vinyl. I couldn't tell much of a difference, and of course, all the pops and the clicks were all in there, the scratches and all that. There was a program that filtered that out, but I didn't like it. It seemed to filter out some music as well. So that was a thing. Anyway, the vinyl information, the microdynamics and the preserving of the spatial information in vinyl gave you this imaging and soundstage effects that you just didn't have with the digital. And that program that I'd used to enhance the dynamics, and I think it was mostly microdynamics, probably bigger dynamics as well, but it was working in the microdynamics on a higher level. That increased the spatial information as well. And it was just crazy how good it could get, right? How much more you could get of all of that, even with not a very expensive stereo system, 2-channel stereo system. So that's one correlation. Another correlation is kind of the opposite, and that's compression. When you'd use some compression with the signal, then that would change the presentation, and it would move images closer to you and narrower. So in some areas where you're having a very simple piece of music, you could make it sound really intimate. And that was a different effect, and that was kind of interesting and fun. Then there's other correlations as well. For example, the last few videos I've made on Fireside Chats have talked about the correlation of distortion and some of the effects of it, right? And how it makes things sound. So you can alter distortions, manipulate distortions, and they can give you increased dynamics and more imaging effects. There's a reason why vacuum tube audio is known for its holographic imaging. And I'm just going to be a heretic again and just say it's because of distortions, right? Now, another thing is the correlation of noise. We've talked about that as well. The baseline noise of the signal-to-noise ratio, the Johnson-Nyquist noise, the shot noise, all these noises that are within our audio systems just inherently because of how things work, how conductors work and things like that. All of that correlates to better dynamics and all that spatial information being preserved and coming through from those recordings and various means. And, some of it's distortions in tubes. And as a result of that, you just get this amazing layering of things. A recent correlation I found was when I took a solid state amplifier, ran it first in voltage drive, and then changed the circuit up and everything, and then ran it in current drive. And it didn't present more focus to imaging. It didn't present any more detail to imaging, but it presented more layering to the imaging. So things came out in front of other things. Things went back in the space of the soundstage, and the width of the soundstage kind of seemed like it increased more. It's like you could, and that was interesting. Some of these recordings you have, like Imogen Heap and that song Hide and Seek, that there's sounds that come out from behind you if you're using the horn lenses, but at the very least with any speaker to the sides of you, you can hear things in that song. So sometimes your soundstage doesn't necessarily get wider, it just gets everywhere. I guess that's the widest soundstage you can have when you hear. So with some of these songs and things like that, with this current drive that enhances this layering, and you could say by extension the soundstage width, you could hear echoes off to the sides of you and things. And that's interesting. That's an effect. And, you know, it's interesting. I've talked about this on the Discord, the ABX Discord, but it is with the horn lenses and panel speakers that I first started to hear imaging from behind the listening position. I hate to say that because it was 10, 20, 30 some years into my audiophile experience. Well, at least 20 years into my audiophile experience before I heard some images coming from behind me in any kind of audio system. So this is a thing. This must have to do with some phasing of things. And we're going to get into this a little bit when I start making these videos. Well, I've already started making them, but when I publish the videos on the open baffle speakers. The stage I'm in right now is trying to make up the information in an organized fashion for those videos, because I know they're going to be a continual resource for people into open baffles, and that's a large part of what I do is open baffle designs and the parts for them, so you can DIYers can make them themselves and stuff. So I kind of have to grab the bull by the horns, so to speak, and clear up myths about open baffles. What produces imaging and how. In order to do that, we have to get into the human head transfer functions and the psychoacoustics. But that's not what this video is about. You guys are getting me down rabbit holes. That's off topic. It's a tangent. Anyway, so these correlations. Also, this is an interesting correlation. The lowest frequencies, I would say below 50 hertz, and the highest frequencies above 10 kilohertz. When you have low noise systems, but you extend those somehow by a super tweeter or a subwoofer, you end up getting better imaging in the mid-range. And that's just crazy, but it's true. And I'm not the only one to hear it. There's other videos. Other people have made videos and have mentioned this. And so I have to think, well, you know, it's interesting because the lower frequencies sure seem to give you a sense of scope. By scope, I mean, if it's a live recording or something, you hear the room and how big it is. That's scope, right? There's certain, the echoes that are happening within there, they just get more accurate with regards to scope. And the highest frequencies add to the focus, the layering, the size of the room still, again, to some degree, but all kinds of little things. I would have to say, and this other one specific aspect that I call echolocation. So it allows you to hear things a little more holographically, for lack of a better word. That term, holographic imaging, I don't know. It's a descriptive term. People use it a lot. It's a thing. I don't know how I feel about it. So that's a thing. All right, so there are other things, the noise, how it does it. and how it relates to things, how it correlates to things in the sound and stuff like that. There's this current drive and its correlation to this effortless, easy sound that it gives. And that doesn't seem to be, there was a guy that came into our room in Expona who has a pair of big Western Electric horns, right? And he said, man, this is the first system I've heard, besides my own, that has this same sort of effortless, easy nature that these big Western Electric I found in these big Western Electric horns. And one of the things that's kind of interesting, this is another tangent, rabbit hole we're getting into a bit now, but one of the things I tried very hard to do, and we're still trying hard. We're going to have some more designs up on the website, but how to make horn loudspeakers as compact as possible. They can get really big, really quick, and that in most home environments is going to be an issue. In other words, the people that have the ability to house a large horn system becomes less and less the bigger it gets. Now, what's interesting is some of these guys that are doing horns, and it's kind of like baffles. For whatever reason, there's these audiophile things where aesthetics is just like primary. It's like a no-can-do thing for some people. If it doesn't look a certain way or it's not within the room a certain way, then they just can't do it. They just can't. Doesn't matter how it sounds. It's visual, and they can't get their brains past it, and that's a thing. In which case, it's not all about the sound, right? Because you have another obstacle here. So, with the baffles, the size of the baffles, the size of speakers, the size of the horns, people look at them and they're, those are way too big for this room. That's not a thing. It's just not a thing. It's too big for you, for your room. You don't like it. Visually, for whatever reason, it's not your preference. And wives, if you ask your wives, what's the ideal aesthetic for a speaker? Well, it's this speaker right here. And you're saying to me, there is no speaker right there. You're right. If you can't see it, that's what they want. They don't want to have to look at something. If the speaker, I suppose, were disguised as a vase or a piece of furniture or a lamp or something that looked like it belonged there in a room, then many wives would be more happy with that. Or the smaller the speaker, the less intrusive it is in the room, they really like that. And I think that's kind of where some of this comes from on some levels, but the aesthetics within this hobby is kind of crazy. But you can't get around the fact that there's a reason why with typical speakers, smaller speakers image easier in a room. And some of that has to do with how they propagate sound into the room. So it's not the size of the speaker per se. Some of it is how that speaker is propagating sound, or how the sound wave itself is using the room or working with the room. So with standard regular speakers, that's kind of a thing, because now you're going to have edges of baffles and speakers that their own sound reflects off of various parts of them, not the front baffle, but the edges. And then could be the back edges and other places and stuff. And because of how we made speakers, and it wasn't until Siegfried Linkwitz started doing this kind of stuff that we even paid attention to some of this stuff. But audiophiles and some of these speaker manufacturers never paid attention to, some of them, to how the woofer, the mid-range, and the tweeter Are they all dispersing the sound? Is all the sound from all three of them all propagating within the room similarly, right? Because we know frequencies below 100 hertz, they're more omnidirectional. Frequencies in the mid-range, they're a little bit more directional, but that's where you get your first reflections too, at about 90 degrees on each side of the speaker, that then is going to create other issues for you, right? And then tweeters, a lot of tweeters are not omnidirectional at all. They're very, very beaming towards the listening position. So sometimes with some of these speakers, they're kind of hot, and as a result, audiophiles play with the toe in and toe out because you get less from those tweeters and it's not so hot. And that's a solution. And that's a viable solution. So that's not a thing. So let's end this. I mean, there's more correlations I could probably talk about. And maybe I'll just add them to the comments or description of this video down below and things. But what correlations? Oh, another correlation. I just want to mention this one before we go. Another correlation I found was the sensitivity of the speakers, no matter how you get it, increases the how do you say this? It increases the perception of detail in the, okay, this is a good way to put it. The sensitivity of the speaker is directly related to the, I just had the word, now I lost it, to the presentation. That's it. The sensitivity of the speaker is directly related to the presentation of the details from the speaker in the sound. You can have detail in a fairly inefficient speaker. Now, when we're talking about sensitivity, that's kind of, this is a rule, you could say, that higher sensitivities, the presentation is a specific way, and it's more present, it's more natural sounding, for lack of a better word, and things like that. Now, that doesn't mean that a kind of a more inefficient speaker is not going to have detail or not have similar detail. It's just going to present differently, right? I find the more sensitive the speakers, the detail is presented rather raw. It sounds more like what you're hearing every day, especially when you're using it with other things that are making it sound easier and effortless and, things like that. Then, but yet still dynamic. Then you get this presentation that you just hear things that you don't hear within less sensitive drivers. Now, the detail's still there. You still hear a lot of things, but it's just how it's presented. So the presentation of the detail is directly related, in my opinion, to the sensitivity of the drivers used. And, this is another thing. There's different ways of gaining higher sensitivity. Let's say you have a speaker and it's 90 dB watt meter sensitive, right? Well, you just add another one of the same driver or the same speaker or whatever. Now you have 93. And then you add two more, now you have 96. And you've just increased your sensitivity. And every time you do that, that detail presents differently. And in my opinion, better, more organically, naturally. And there's things you can do, like even the frequency response. You can add more to the treble range, and the detail's going to present differently. You can add, so it's just kind of these correlations we have in audio between some specific things. Some of them, there's not necessarily specifications, but they're traits or things. Then some of them are specifications to a degree, but they're not. It's a specification of a piece of gear, but it's not a specification in a sense, or you could say it's a specification in a system. If you have one driver and you add another driver, like let's say in an open baffle, and you have one woofer and you add a second woofer, you're going to increase in 3 decibels, right? And that's going to increase your sensitivity, and you're going to have a different presentation of the details of that speaker. Now, an exception to that rule, because every rule has an exception, is that you can have some noisy, sensitive drivers that lose that presentation, that don't have it. Or you can have them to where the dispersion of them is such that sensitivity is in a narrower band because it's frequency response and things. And that's going to present differently. And it's not necessarily going to follow that rule. And you could go to low sensitivity. And there's the exception there is some of these panel speakers, particularly electrostatics. Electrostatics can have that same sort of feel of the presentation of the detail, and they're not sensitive. But you have some other similarities there. A very small amount of mass moving very little, like you get in a compression driver. So there's somehow the amount of mass and how much it's moving, that's correlated to some of the sensitivity things. So, but you could just, the more drivers you add, the more speakers you add, like the wall of sound from the Grateful Dead, the more sensitive you can get. Sensitivity at the watt meter level. And those kind of huge speaker systems, you have to measure from a distance and then calculate the sensitivity at 1 meter, because you know how far, how much generally that specific mid-range of sound is going to reduce through the propagation of it through the air. Things get quieter as you get further away. So then you can recalculate, because you know that those mathematical formulas, and that's how some of these horn manufacturers and other things measure them. Sometimes some of these speakers you can't measure at 1 meter because there's no central point where they're all equal, all the 3 drivers are equally loud. So you have to measure at maybe 3 meters or 4 meters and then recalculate for 1 meter. And then you have an accurate understanding of how it's going to sound within a room and its sensitivity with all the drivers combined and things, and its frequency response and so on. So there's correlations there. There's correlations with frequency response and different types of frequency response, the Harman curve and things like that, and how things sound. And that's just the way it is. And the Harman curve is based upon the fact that higher frequencies don't travel through air as the same as lower frequencies. And so by the time you're maybe sitting 3 meters from the speaker, the treble is now dropped off a few dB compared to the bass, because bass travels through air more efficiently. So those are all those correlations, and here I am making practically a 30-minute fireside chat again. I try to make these like 15-minute fireside chats, but they're not organized. They're just me yammering, talking about stuff, falling into rabbit holes and tangents and stuff. So that's that. So we'll just end there. You post your correlations you found in audio. It could be 4 ohm, 8 ohm differences with specific amplifiers and how that makes things sound different. And I know personally, because of some of the things I've already shared in previous videos, that a lot of that has to do with distortions and other things, and how the amp and the speaker are related to each other, whether it's voltage or current drive and other things. So, and I didn't make some more controversial correlations that I could have made, but some of you may do that, and then some of you may argue with them, and it's going to be quite the fest down in the comments. So it's a thing. So anyway, let's end it here. And this is La Dolce Audio. Welcome along in our audio journey of 2-channel audio.